All right, and with me now are Jeffrey Hall with Thomson Reuters and Nancy Koehn of the Harvard Business School. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, I was fascinated reading today the New York Times profile of what AIG is. I mean, they lease airplanes, they insure Indian tribes and elementary school teachers, and they also said that the majority of this company is financially solvent, really solid. It's this London arm of the deal that's so shaky, which has to do with the housing market. So why is the company in this dire straits? Why do they need this kind of money if, for the most part, they're solvent?
Unfortunately, yeah, they do have their hand in a lot of games right now. They're also an owner of a sports team. They're
Which one?
I think it's one of the premier football clubs.
So they can sell that?
They could. They could liquidate some of those assets. They also have stake as a commodity index on an exchange in Chicago. So they have their hands in a lot of games outside of insurance. But it's insurance. They're providing about $300 billion, almost a third of $1 trillion worth of mortgage insurance to businesses right now. And with their heavy underwriting of subprime loans, which was what triggered this crisis in the first place, they're on the hook. And if they go under, they don't have the ability to protect the defaults of the bankruptcies of the banks that they've
It's really the housing arm.
It still largely stems from the onset of the housing crisis. But AIG is one of those cases where they're that octopus-like. They have their tentacles in so many areas and so many counterparties at risk here that I think it was appropriate for the Fed to step in and provide that bridge loan.
You know, Nancy, Henry Paulson said the other day that we haven't had any new regulations since the 1930s, but we have. We had some regulations in the 90s, which some people say led to the ability of places like Lehman to leverage 30 to 1. What would new regulations do that would have stopped something like this?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, we'd want regulations in place that held the leadership of these banks to much higher standards of accountability, literally to knowing what's on their balance sheet before so much is at risk. Secondly, we'd want some kind of fallback or some kind of safety net for all the different kinds of assets that Main Street, that you and I and millions of households have on the line in this kind of interrelated crisis. And I think thirdly, we want some kind of, at least in the short run, government agency or government arm that takes over this kind of, mopping up and ensuring the kind of confidence that is so much at risk here in the aftermath of an extraordinary moment like this one.
You know, I remember when the term investment banking first came onto the scene, I don't know, 30 years ago, whenever I remember, what is that? And now you look at this and you think, are they all going to disappear? You got Bear Stearns is gone, Merrill Lynch is gone, and now, Merrill Lynch has been bought anyway. Morgan Stanley is on the line. There's only 2 left. I mean, is this kind of, our professor there described it as a very creative arm, and it seemed like it was just sort of traveling along in this bubble. Is that gone?
It may be a case of creative destruction where we had, a maturing of the industry. And, it is the type of thing where the strongest will survive. We've gone from 5 investment banks down to 2 in the short span of a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months at best. But the financial system does work, and it will, I think, evolve stronger. It may not look quite like it does today, but it should evolve stronger over time.
Do you think, Nancy, the political, moppings around on all this is going to make a difference? I mean, would it make a difference in terms of who's in office? Or has this crisis got to mend itself within the industry?
Both things have to happen. This is clearly going to be a public-private remedy, a public-private shoring up of confidence, of increased resiliency in the financial system. It has to be. And so it's a political opportunity, but it's an opportunity that demands a kind of courage and resolution that we really haven't seen on either side of the aisle. Not on the campaign trail, and really, quite frankly, not in Congress.
Well, no one wants to get on the wrong side of big business.
Well, this isn't quite as simple as being on the wrong side. It's about demanding from and working with business for a kind of solution that provides stability for the entire system and for literally the millions, maybe billions of people, if we think about the rest of the world, that have a huge stake in the U.S. capital markets.
Why could nobody see this coming? We always ask this in hindsight. I mean, I don't know enough about it. But when I'm reading the precarious nature of some of these leveraged outfits, I think, how come somebody with knowledge of this couldn't have, you didn't know what was going to happen?
There have been warnings all throughout. There have been warnings. It's just that no one wants to be responsible for taking away the punch bowl at the 11th hour of the party. And, you know, Greenspan was quite vocal about his opposition to the structure of the government-sponsored enterprises of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's only now that we've had to put those into conservatorship. There have been warnings about undue risk-taking and the extent to which the Fed had lowered rates in the last downturn down to 1% and creating speculative risk and excessive imprudent judgments and assessments of those risks. And S&P and Moody's, the ratings agency, should have been doing a better job of prescribing adequate risk assessment to these loans and to these portfolios. And so some had.
Yeah, they're doing it now, which is a little too late.
Right.
I think there's something else as well, though. There's a governance issue here. There's a governance issue at these banks and at the top of the chain here in terms of what leaders of these institutions and their boards of directors knew about what they owned and what their exposure was. You know, I think a little bit about this, and I think about the retailing business. It's a little bit like the CEO of Merrill Lynch saying he's not sure what's on the balance sheet. It's a little bit like Howard Schultz of Starbucks saying, I'm not really sure how many stores I have. Now, that is simply untenable. And it is at some fundamental, an unintended, I think, but very significant breach of fiduciary responsibility.
Why, Nancy, does the stock market not like the fact that the feds came in to bail out AIG? I mean, the opposite, the other result would have been a total disaster. So why is this regarded so negatively?
I'm not sure that's really what this last-minute sell-off represents. I think it represents what Keynes called animal spirits, and their importance in the market, and a great fear, underlying fear, that there are more dominoes potentially as big to fall.
Wow. You think there are too?
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, the Fed had an opportunity to cut interest rates yesterday. They didn't. I think they didn't want to add to alarm. But, the market has a pretty good record of performance of predicting the future. And what they're saying in today's sell-off is that there are more bodies in the basement, that the banks still have significant write-downs that are coming, that the banks aren't lending. They're not lending to each other. They're having trouble lending to consumers. So there's this seizure of liquidity, and the Fed is trying to do its best with injections of liquidity, but it's a crisis of confidence right now. The economy, I would argue that the economy is not in as bad a shape as the rate.
Absolutely.
Well, that's good to hear.
But the Fed has to do more to inject liquidity in order to keep this thing, these glass balls in the air.
All right, well, thanks. That's informative. Nancy Koehn, Jeffrey Hall, thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
Thank you.